there's one clip that I wanted to do specifically, which is a recent clip of Jonathan Haidt on CNN. Okay, that's the clip I want to build to. But I figured I wanted to take us on a little bit of a journey to sort of like get the flavor of hate before we get to that segment. And so I found this clip. It's 13 minutes long. It's with Jonathan Haidt, uh, some New York reporter that I can't even. He works for the New York Times, and now for the life of me, can't remember his name. We'll find out who it is. And then there's some other dude, and the other dude is the host of the show, but he's filling in for Charlie Rose. So this was the Charlie Rose show, and we all know Charlie Rose no longer has a show because he also turned out to be a sex pest. So, but this was prior to that, I suppose. But there was a host fill in, okay, and everyone here sucks. I should just frame it, but it's like it's terribly edited in a certain way. This clip, but I think like there's enough here, and you'll see what I mean by that. It's like they'll jump around like uh I think like to shorten it, but like it wasn't perfectly edited by whoever did it. But I think like the essence of what I want is here, and it'll sort of give us a gist of like what Jonathan Haidt thinks before we move on to the CNN piece. And the CNN piece is literally I think came out yesterday or 2 days ago. Like it's really recent, and it's terrible. And so I wanted to talk about it, but this is going to give us a. I've wanted to talk about Jonathan Haidt for a very long time, in particular because when I was doing my honors thesis, his book that's called The Righteous Mind had just come out, and I was studying political psychology for my honors thesis, and given that he that's what Jonathan Haidt does. So this new book, it was becoming a huge bestseller, and I had to read it if I was going to, you got to read the literature in the field that you're talking about when that shit comes out, right? And so I read the book. The one thing that I will say, so the book is sort of like split up into three parts. The first part's really good, and Tim Marsh in chat will concede to this because we've already chatted about this briefly on stream before, which is that Haidt's early work isn't that terrible. So he did work on what is called moral dumbfounding or like moral intuitionism. And so the idea is this: like, say I'll pose this to you, Eric. Say I give you a moral conundrum, and you don't have to like feel like I'm giving you like a gotcha or anything like this. But say you get proposed the question like, is incest bad? Something like, it makes people uncomfortable. We're going to talk about this thing, and then you give an answer. So say just like a yes or no answer. Like, is incest bad?
Yes.
Right? So then how this experiment would work is then you would do like questions like, why is it bad? Now usually people will give the answer of like uh if they find an answer they'll say something like I don't know because it'll create birth defects if they have a child or something along those lines, okay? And usually then you could respond to that with, well, what if they had protection? Would it be still bad? And then people will still say yes. And then you go down this like sort of path. Like keep asking. It's kind of like a child asking like why questions. You know what I mean? Where
Yeah.
they're like, well, why?
Yeah.
Well, why? Why? And you keep going down the hole, and eventually someone will just like, it's wrong because it's wrong. You know? It's like the reasonings just bottom out, and they're just like, I don't have to explain it to you. It's just fucking wrong. Okay? And that works for most people. I think the only demographic he found that it didn't work for was people who studied ethics in, in university. In part because people who study ethics in university are weird fucking people, and I could agree with that. I'm one of them. I'd probably sit there and think about all the ways in which it could be wrong or not wrong, and like complicate the whole fucking thing, right? But most people, like, it'll eventually reach, like, it'll bottom out, and they'll just be like, it's just wrong. And he built up this theory which is called this like moral intuition theory, which is that like we like to think that we've rationally figured out all of our moral positions and that we're like rationally justified in holding them. But often we hold on to things for no reason at all, really, other than it'll like it's usually an emotional thing where it just feels wrong, right? It feels like it's wrong. And like that is actually what's undergirding our moral statements, not uh, some logical, reasoned out process for why something is
Mhm.
wrong. And so,
I've
yeah, I was just
sorry, I
gonna
was gonna
say
say
I like that work. Yeah.
the logical response to that, you know, what would be why, right? Just to get in the rhetorical questioning side of things. But
Like
but
like why people just base it on emotions, or
no, just to, get into the line of questioning until we get to the it, you know, it's I don't know, I was doing a bit, it didn't land. I apologize. Should we
I
get
thought
into
you
it?
I thought you were asking a serious question.
Oh, no, no, no.
No, I mean like that's pretty much it. I mean, it leaves you with like uh an interesting thought, which is like we like to think. I mean, like you think of all the rational centrist types out there, which is ironic that this is coming from hate. But the idea, like Sam Harris, that like we're just these rational creatures where we should think things through and come to logical, rational conclusions, and most of us don't. you know, we're just we're often motivated by things like disgust or uh euphoria or like our emotional states that sort of like impel us towards certain moral positions rather than some logical working out of it. And
Mhm.
that is an interesting fact to know about human beings. Okay, so that's the first part of that his I guess best-selling book. Then the second part gets a little bit weirder, which is his theory of moral foundation. And the reason why it's weirder is because this part of his work is true just as like an empirical fact, which is that he studied liberals and he studied conservatives on like sort of like their moral positions and sort of like weighted uh what kind of values they hold, right? So you have he sort of broke it down based on like previous work that we don't have to get into, but there's like certain sort of like moral values that remain kind of consistent throughout like human existence. Things like loyalty or fairness or uh, trust and authority or believing that things are like sacred or like so there's these certain like values, okay? And then he sees where liberals lay on all these values, and then he sees where conservatives lay on all these values. And what you find is that liberals score really high on trust and fairness. They really value trust and fairness. They don't really value things like loyalty and sanctity. Okay, and it's kind of like in the middle. It's kind of all over for like other values. Conservatives,
Mhm.
they tend to be like flatlined right across the board. So they're like when it comes to trust and fairness, they're like lower than liberals. But when it comes to things like loyalty and sanctity, they're higher, right? But like across the board, they kind of have like an equal dipping into all the values. And hate took from that work to say that conservatives are kind of like more well-rounded when it comes to like their moral views because they have a little bit of everything, right? Where liberals completely just neglect loyalty and sanctity. So therefore, they're like not as morally developed. Okay?
Yeah. Their brains are bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is like the most centrist position ever to be like, you know what, the absolute human ideal is pragmatism and also not being consistent in
Yeah.
any sort of value system. That's wild.
Now, like I might go, and maybe because I would be more consistent with the liberals of this, and be like, I don't know, truth is really important. Maybe more important than just blindly following someone for no fucking reason, you know? And then he'll say, "That's just your liberal bias, man."
Oh, right. It's kind of bulletproof, right? Because I mean, the people that he scores very high in this I guess you would call it a study, are people that are loyal and probably won't question it, and the people that come off worse, they're gonna be mad because they came off worse for it, right? So
Well,
like,
it's weird too because I don't know. There's like an element of like why he seems to think that he's drawing a scientific conclusion from this, right? Where most people who reviewed his book, like you had, of course, a lot of people who were just like, they loved the book, it was wonderful, all the centrist publications just thought it was like a work of brilliance, okay? But like a lot of the more critical people, John Jost is one of them who I really liked his work, and I can get to some of that in a bit. He worked on something called system justification theory, which I can get to in a second. But John Jost's criticism was uh, like in Haidt sort of spelling this out seems to bias the conservatives over the liberals, even though he's like painfully unaware that he's doing so. And yet, and yet, weirdly enough, is accusing liberals of being overly biased. It's like, and yet he's like still to this day completely unaware of the fact that he's doing this.
So does he like think that he's like perfected some sort of system and that the system like the algorithm chose it? It wasn't it's like it's just an objective fact. It's not anything he can control.
Uh, I don't know if it's like about control, because like I would argue that like part of like his career has to rely on the fact that people can control it. Because I think he would argue that like what liberals need to do is to be more like conservatives in a certain way. Okay, which says to me that he must know, like he must think that they can change in some way. Okay, but like what you can say, and this is like the I don't know if it's interesting, but like the empirical fact of what he measured is true. Like, yes, liberals tend to support things like fairness and like truth over things like loyalty and authority, right? Like that is
Hmm.
an empirical fact if his data replicates in like all the other fun scientific things, right? And I haven't kept up with the literature, so I don't know how it stands in the grand scheme of science, okay? But if it's true, it's like, yes, that's a really interesting empirical fact. The only thing is like, I don't know, like you can disagree with Haight's position in terms of like liberals changing by saying like, I don't know, maybe the discrepancy between these positions have to do with like material situations, and therefore it's like that you can't. Where I feel like Haight comes more from the position that like I guess people can just like pull themselves up by their like moral bootstraps and just become more conservative, or if like I really don't know from his work like where he lands on this, but like I guess like the other position you could adopt is like maybe we need to incentivize liberals to become more conservative by changing the material circumstances. Like I don't know.
Yeah, it's. I don't think it'd be a very easy sell to just get people to have more faith in authority. You know, like it doesn't seem like a thing that would go over particularly well. And it's also, I mean, I agree that like this is it makes sense like on a common sense level that conservatives would trust authority a lot more and be much less interested in fairness, seeing as I mean the only thing that really convinces people to vote conservative these days is uh tax breaks for people that are earning a lot of money. um
Like
yeah.
like the
I'm
empirical
sorry.
picture fits with our intuitions about where we think this would end up, right? Except I think conservatives would object to the fact that they like don't value trust as much as everyone else, right? I think they would object to that, even though I think you and I empirically we feel pretty confident saying that that probably is the case.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
but like the element is which is like this idea that like what hate takes from this obviously is not in the data itself, which is that like to somehow say like the liberals are not the ones who are well rounded, but then like furthermore like the extension of it is like especially silly to me, which is that to me it becomes in the realm of like morals. It's a moral question, which is that like should we value trust and fairness lower as liberals, or should we keep it as high as it is? And like to me, that is a moral question. Like I don't know how you can empirically assess that, other than I like maybe this gets back to his moral intuition work, and I'm just like I don't know. Fairness and truth seem pretty cool and based.
Yeah.
I feel them pretty
Yeah.
strongly. It's gonna take a lot to move me and convince me that somehow the assholes who just blindly follow some fucking dictator are the ones that we should listen to, or be more like them, you know?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm struggling with this is, ascribing specific value to something as amorphous as, fairness or authority to be, to try and quantify that as something is it's difficult for me as someone who kind of lives in a, kind of world. Um yeah, it's very odd to even think about things like trust and fairness as something that you can put on a bar graph. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing this guy talk.
Yeah, I will say, like, up front, like, that is a general question with this work, and it's hard to answer that as well. Like, I mean, like, you kind of just have to accept what the constructs are and treat them as they sort of, like, put them out there. But, like, there are questions like, are you really capturing fairness in the questionnaires that you give to people or in the experiments that you set up? I mean, those are all interesting questions, but I am kind of sidestepping them here. I will just take for granted that these concepts that he came up with in the lab match what we generally think of as fairness in the wild. But those are all good questions that people way smarter than me are paid to work at. I will read Tim's spam in the chat with some stuff which I love, but like
Yeah,
Tim, for those who don't know,
it's good stuff.
he is a social psychologist. Does this kind of work. So he goes, my favorite thing about moral foundations theory is that researchers other than Haidt have done much more systematic work than Haidt has to explain the political breakdown of the five foundations. The leading approach is that the two liberal metamoral favored foundations are individualizing core moral values that operate well at scale, whereas the other three parochial foundations are purely binding domains that serve smaller group and intergroup conflicts context. Okay, so I guess like the other three like lumped together, whereas truth and fairness lumped together, and therefore they differ in certain contexts as well. The context thing is interesting because people's personality also differs in context. Context matters, I guess, which is like getting to sort of what you're saying, which is like people don't always act the same in the lab as they do in the wild.
100%.
What that ultimately means is that we should expect anyone who lives in cosmopolitan terms, acknowledging pluralism and the need to reach consensus at scale, will favor the first two and disfavor the other three. So there's a meaningful reason why liberals and conservatives vary, and shockingly, it isn't a deficit on the liberal side. The stupid thing about Haidt's approach is that he identifies that a set of broad intuitions exists, notes that some people actively use some more than others, then simply infers that more is better. So the people who rely on the broader range of intuitions are doing better. That's just wrong, though. The intuitions are not made equal. Not only is it like it's amazing to me how wrong it is because I was aware of how stupid this was when I read this book in like my undergrad when I was like a young 20-year-old, you know. I read it and could be like, this is not good. How did this grown ass man writing a fucking bestseller book somehow mess this up?
Oh man. And yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to have mattered that he messed it up at all because I before I came on the show, I watched one of his segments on
Bill Maher.
everyone's favorite Bill Maher's show, talking about how Gen Z is has been too coddled and they've taken over control. And I mean, I don't know how that plays into his writing, but boy was that a stupid segment.
Yeah, I mean, this is his big thing. His most recent book was The Coddling of the American Mind, which is all about like there's now like safe spaces on campus and microaggressions and like the typical shit that we hear from these like right wing anti SJW types. And you can even look at like the places he goes to have these conversations. You know, he's been on Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson. I think even Ben Shapiro's talked to him. Like, you know, he makes the fucking rounds to like these people. The other thing that you'll notice as well, like, and I picked up on this, is I've listened to a whole bunch of his things just because like I'm utterly fascinated by these types of figures. But like never, ever, like consider the world we live in today. Never ever does he mention like right wing the weird shit that right wings do. other than like he'll vaguely gesture towards like Trump being bad, right? There'll be a vague hand gesture of like, Trump, bad things happening. But then it's like you got to think of like what this onus like creates, right? Because like the other part of his theory is that somehow these coddled kids are the ones that are somehow motivating the reaction. But like the Trumpist reaction is the result of these like meddling kids who yell at teachers on campus or something, right? And
Yeah,
then it's
yeah.
like,
It's
why couldn't it be the reverse of it? Why not like it's the assholes out there that are doing shitty things that are causing the kids to react? But
yeah,
that never it's yeah.
it's that like really age old fallacy that is the your wokeness caused me to commit hate crimes, like nonsense that gets paraded around, right? Like it's can't blame people for wanting to live in a better world and for your shitty behavior, right?
Well, he tries. He's gonna blame them anyways.
Hello, my rebels. Hello, my rebels. I'm a good boy. I'm a weirdo.